Dr. Jill Stein and Matthew Ho, two celebrated champions of democracy who have put it all on the line at great personal risk to make a better world and to open up the system for parties beyond the duopoly, two parties of corporate greed. So with that said, let me introduce our guests. Jill Stein is an organizer, physician, and environmental health advocate. As the Green presidential candidate in 2016 and 2012, she gave national voice to the Green agenda that progressives now widely give lip service to. From an emergency Green New Deal to Medicare for all, a student debt bailout, and reparations. She also brought public attention to the Greens' foreign policy based on diplomacy, international law, and human rights instead of militarism and US exceptionalism. Following the 2016 election, Jill launched a recount initiative that exposed voter suppression in communities of color. It also raised the bar for election integrity with a settlement requiring Pennsylvania to replace hackable electronic voting machines with secure paper ballots and robust audits. Separately, Jill was targeted in a McCarthyite investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee for 3 years, which she successfully fought. Jill is currently battling the Federal Election Commission in a court case with major implications for alternative candidates seeking fair access to public matching funds. This is critical for giving grassroots candidates a shot at ballot access and for giving voters choices on the ballot beyond the parties of war and Wall Street. Jill is now working on a national Earth Day strike for people, planet, and peace over profit. The strike promotes peaceful, nonviolent action to halt the engines of economic, ecological, and military destruction, while building cross-movement solidarity to tackle the crises of climate collapse, endless war, and crushing inequality. I wish I could hear you all right now, but let's give it up for Dr. Jill Stein. And of course, Matthew Ho. Matthew Ho is a candidate for the 2022 North Carolina Green Party nomination for US Senate. In 2009, Matthew resigned in protest from his post in Afghanistan with the State Department over the American escalation of the war. In 2010, Matthew was named the Weidenauer Prize recipient for truth-telling. Matthew's writings have appeared in online and print periodicals such as the Huffington Post, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. He has been a guest on hundreds of news programs and on radio and television networks, including CBS, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, NPR, the BBC, and PBS. And once again, give it up for Matthew Ho and Jill Stein. This is a very exciting evening we have planned for you. As always, I'm honored to be hosting such distinguished guests. And just to let you know briefly, the format is for approximately a half hour. This is just going to be a discussion among two, as I said, two great champions of democracy and fairness. And as Jill likes to say, people, planet, and peace over profit. And then we will have a Q&A section. So what I ask people to do is leave their questions either in the Q&A section or in the chat. I will be taking questions. I will ask them. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of people here. I probably can't get to everyone, but you know, these discussions can be continued beyond the webinar, and I will give you an email address for me if you want to direct any questions. I'll make sure I get them to them. And with all that said, let me turn off my camera and do what I can to get the screen just right for Jill and Matt. And I'd say, Jill, take it away.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much, Rose, for your kind words. Thank you for organizing this. And thank you, Matthew, for this opportunity to talk with you. And above all, thank you so very much for running and for being our voice, which we really urgently need. And to start, I just want to appreciate the title of this webinar, The Urgency of People-Powered Politics, I think you called it, or something to that effect. And I feel like that really says it all in a nutshell. This moment is incredibly urgent. We're in the middle of converging crises, existential threats really to our lives and our future. And people-powered politics is really critical to taking on those battles. And I'll just, briefly name what to me is the crisis of the moment, and the fact that they're all converging. Any one of them is really enough to do us in, and that is really this crushing economy, crushing for everyday people, for working people, for youth, for students, for elders, for marginalized communities. The economy, yeah, we hear lots about how great it is, but that's really for the investor class. It's for the top 10%. Right. 60% of Americans now say in polls that they just can't keep up. And this was already in an economy in which about 50% are either in or near poverty and are barely surviving at a time when in the COVID stresses and strains of the economy, we saw the billionaires grow their wealth by $2 trillion, I think is the latest figure, $2 trillion in the last 2 years, while an additional 8 million people joined the ranks of poverty. So we have a crushing economy. There's really no question about it, especially now with rising fuel costs, which is not only, the impact of Russia's invasion, or if you want to call it the U.S.-Russia proxy war, that horrible war that we're witnessing is contributing to the economic hardships, but also the sanctions. The sanctions that the U.S. has imposed have really drastically increased, the economic strains on all of us, especially on fuel costs, on food costs, and so on. So, so we have this crushing economy. We have endless war, which has been going on for quite some time, and now is verging on a cataclysm of nuclear confrontation and potential annihilation. Polls show that 70% of the American public is concerned about a real threat of nuclear war, and we have the climate crisis on top of that. I would call it the climate collapse. It's not just a crisis. It's really a terminal crisis that we badly need to change course on, and which we could change course on, and which, as Greens, we've been calling for a really comprehensive and transformative solution for quite some time, an emergency Green New Deal, as if this was a wartime emergency. It's more than a wartime emergency, because it's something that just can't be recovered from. So in a nutshell, those are sort of three of the leading converging crises right now. And the problem is that the parties of war on Wall Street have declined to fix them. Those who have presided over the development of this crisis, and you can lay different portions of blame on either one, but they're all basically funded by the same predatory forces that are profiting and profiteering off of these crises. So that's why, we talk about independent politics as really critical to the solution, because as long as we have the best democracy that money can buy, candidates and political parties who are essentially the puppets who are taking marching orders from these very powerful political and economic elites, we don't have a fighting chance. I heard a talk by Richard Wolff, the economist, yesterday, in which he said something that I think rings true to all of us, which is that since the Great Depression, every year, the economic disparities have increased. It's not like it's been a back and forth. It's been steady, straight ahead. And there have been numerous attempts to reform the Democrats as the supposedly more progressive of the two parties. When I was coming of age politically back in the 70s, there was a movement called the realignment movement, which was where labor, which was going pretty strong at the time, and the civil rights movement, which was going very strong at the time, got together to try to reform the Democratic Party, and they couldn't, mainly because of the war in Vietnam. And that just made it impossible for people to get together around, which sort of, there's a lesson there right in and of itself, how much the power of the military industrial complex, how powerful that is, and that we really can't change politics unless we grapple with that too. So I'm just acknowledging that, yes, we need people-powered independent politics, which is why Matt's campaign is so absolutely critical. And I want to say one more thing about Matt's campaign. I am personally so grateful every day when I wake up and think that, yes, we have skin in this game. We have someone who is fighting for us across the board. And at this moment, where we just saw the military budget get bigger than ever, with Biden's proposal that there be an additional, whatever it is, 31, some say, Stephen Semler says it's more like 70 billion increase. I'm not sure which one it is, but either way, it's too large. And even prior to that increase, it was too large for us to be putting 50% of our hard-won resources into the destruction of humanity and civilization and the environment. This is just absolutely nuts. And it's really testimony to the stranglehold of the military industrial complex over our political system. So I just want to really encourage people to throw in, to just assist, to lend a hand before the night is over. Please join me in making a contribution to this campaign, because we really need Matt to be on the ballot. This is really the flagship race, not just for Greens, but I think for independent politics, for people who are advocating for peace. And at a time when we are really the military industrial complex is at our throats right now. This is a knife at all of our throats, and the rest of our economy and the climate and all the rest of it, it doesn't stand a chance. And who has more credibility and more knowledge and firsthand experience to really challenge that stranglehold of the military industrial complex? So I'm just really grateful that Matt is running and is out there and is leading the charge, because a veteran who has served 3 tours of combat duty, who has seen close up firsthand what's going on in Iraq and then Afghanistan, the 2 most recent massive military catastrophic boondoggles, who better is there to stand up and to challenge, not only to challenge, but really to stop this rush headlong into yet another war, which could readily, go ballistic in a moment. So, it's really important that we stop, we stop the engines that are racing towards the cliff right now, not only in the current enthusiasm for war, for fighting, for a for so-called opening the skies, over over Ukraine. We need to stop this crisis, and we need to challenge the stranglehold of the military-industrial complex writ large. So with that, I want to just give Matt a big thank you and really thank everyone for being here tonight and encourage you to join me in really supporting this campaign. Take it away, Matt.
Oh, thanks, Jill. Yeah, well, thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for being so supportive. You've been so helpful to me over these last few months, and a crutch in many ways, with such good advice and suggestions, and just someone I could talk to. And it's been very helpful for me. I also want to thank Rose for putting this together, and of course, everyone, the 89 people who are on here tonight on a Friday night, watching this with us. I appreciate you all. And I also see a bunch of folks who are part of the campaign. I've probably missed a few, but I see Tommy James and Janie and Nick and Leanne, and I'm not sure who else is on there. Now we're up to 90 people watching. So, but I just wanted to say I appreciate all the people who are involved in this effort. And it is a people-powered campaign. I mean, I can tell you how much money we've raised. I can tell you how many corporate donations we have. I can tell you how many lobbying groups have called us to say we'll help out. I can tell, right? I mean, like the urgency, I think, is what inspires people. It certainly is. The urgency is for me. I know it's for you, Jill. I know it's for Rose, and I know it's for, people like Tommy, and I know for the other folks who are part of the campaign, doing all kinds of great stuff for us, trying to get us on the ballot. There's an urgency, and a lot of it comes from personal experience. And the things you were talking about, I think existential is a word that is often overused or exaggerated. It's like a lot of times it's hyperbole, oh, it's existential, and we actually are facing a lot of existential crises right now. Like, honest to God, like you talked about nuclear war and the climate. I mean, those are absolutely existential crises. My friend George, who says we're perpetually in 2020. We could either die in 20 minutes from nuclear war, or we can die in 20 years from climate change. And climate crisis and climate collapse, which is probably, Jill, what I'll be using from now on, because I think that is the most articulate, I think, way to describe it, because the collapse that is coming is just not the rising sea levels and the droughts and the forest fires and the hurricanes and all the things that come with those things, but it's the societal collapse that's going to occur. I was in Elizabeth City, New Jersey, North Carolina, 2 weeks ago, and talking with a journalist there. And he was saying how the plan that the people in the town who want to admit to what's actually occurring, what science tells us is occurring, what the evidence tells us is occurring, is that in Elizabeth City is about 12 feet above sea level. So it's not like it's right on sea level. They got a buffer. But, their thing is, we're going to have to pick up our downtown and move it back several blocks. I mean, you're talking about how many towns and cities up and around the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Gulf Coast will have to do that. I mean, so when we talk about collapse, what's going to happen to people's incomes? What's going to happen to people's homes? What's going to happen to people's chances for education, for family? I mean, the amount of displacement that's going to occur. And so when you say things like World War II in terms of describing what the Green New Deal must be like, and when literally we nationalize industries throughout the country, which is what we have to do to face this climate collapse if we want to have a chance to not just mitigate it, but to survive it. When you understand the breadth and the scope that's involved here, you understand this is existential, and only a massive effort, just as in the same way with nuclear weapons. We have 10,000 nuclear weapons in the world. You only need about 100 of those to destroy human civilization. Only 100 of the 10,000 nuclear weapons in the world are enough to turn cities into such burning ash heaps that the sky will be blacked out for 5 to 10 years and we all die from starvation. I mean, that's all it takes. So, so in order to deal with that, that's massive too, because we have to get rid of all nuclear weapons. We do, you know, but the existential part too, Jill, right? It comes to what individual families are dealing with. You know, the cost of housing, that's existential for so many families. I mean, people who listen to me talk about this know one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because of people in my neighborhood who have to move because of housing costs, who already work far away from their jobs, now are living even farther away from their jobs, excuse me. You know, like the idea that you have less in your checking account every month, not just because of inflation, but because of all these other healthcare, education, housing costs, your wages aren't going up, and no one is going to do anything about that within the federal government unless we change it. And those are very real existential things, because that breaks up the family unit, that breaks up the family. You know, I mean, people in my neighborhood, one family in particular I'm thinking of who had to move, they now live farther away from where the mom works. I guarantee she's paying more actually for where she moved to than what she was paying before. She's certainly spending a lot more money on gasoline now, but the cost of everything else has gone up, right? And now she has less time to spend with her kids because she's commuting at least a half hour or 45 minutes each way, in addition to what she was doing before. So this is a really existential crisis that people are facing. And then you add on to that COVID, which people will say, well, that's not existential. It certainly is existential for the 1 million the families of 1 million Americans who've died from that. Certainly is. You know, so I appreciate you being here tonight with me, the way you phrased all that, you know, and I also know too, because I want people to understand, and if you're okay talking about this, what you're going through with the FEC, because what you're going through right now, because you put yourself on the line multiple times, you've run several times as a candidate, you know, including as a presidential candidate, and now they're coming after you. And that's not hyperbole to say that either. You know, you are being punished for trying to represent the interests of working families as well as the planet. I really believe that. And if you're okay with talking about it, because I don't know if everyone is familiar with what you're going through and just how dastardly, you know, how nefarious, right? How you know, wrong the political system is, because it has this ability to do it, which kind of gets us into the conversation later about ballot access, about electoral reform, about what we need to do to actually, you know, strengthen, enlarge, you know, make our democracy more inclusive. But if you don't mind talking a bit about what you're going through with the FEC.
Well, it's like, watch what you wish for, because I can start ranting. And, you know, that's a good show, Jill. It's Friday night. Give the people a show, right? I also want to be sure that we're, you know, that we can speak to the urgency of your campaign, which I feel like is our fight back. And I'll say a few words about my fight with the FEC. And I'll also just say that, you know, you can get the details at jillstein.net, which is all about that fight. And to make a long story short, I got a repayment order from the FEC, which didn't really get finalized until, I don't know, a couple months ago. So like 5 years after the fact, I got notice from the FEC that I have to pay them back $175,000 personally, for the money that the public funds that our campaign earned and spent on ballot access. But the FEC has very complicated rules. Even a team of corporate lawyers doesn't ensure that you're going to get those rules right. And they are run by Democrats and Republicans who can make decisions about about a whole lot of judgment calls as well. So let me just say that the process is not friendly, and especially not friendly to small grassroots campaigns. It's part of the way the whole system is very much biased against competitors to the political establishment. You know, it's kind of an establishment protection institution, big bureaucracy, and they can kind of get their claws around you, and then they have a lot of political and they have political power, but they also have legal power, and I will have a lot to teach, future candidates working with the FEC and the people who are working with me to deal with this. We have all resolved that that we're going to do some workshops as soon as we break free enough to have time to teach what we've been learning, because we have just learned a huge amount. We've had to basically become accountants and FEC compliance experts in order to learn how to deal with this stuff. And I don't want to bore you with more details than that, except to say you can go to my website, juststein.net, if you're interested. But this has been going on for 2 years. It followed a 3-year fight with the Senate Intelligence Committee, which targeted me for allegedly colluding with Russia. And it was nonsense. I mean, I was accused in the Steele dossier, which was the first thing, produced by Christopher Steele, which has since been completely discredited.
Yeah.
Even by the Department of Justice. Their own inspector general basically quoted the FBI in saying this was just a pack of internet hearsay.
Right.
And when I heard that I was being named in the Steele dossier, I thought, oh, well, then it must be a complete pile of crap, because what they were accusing me of having been funded by the Kremlin to have gone to this RT media conference where I had a chance to speak to international media about the 3 goals of our campaign, which were a global Green New Deal, nuclear weapons abolition, and a peace offensive in the Middle East, just after Russia had begun bombing Syria. And one of my public statements, and my statements were all public, they were on the internet, so it's like a joke. It was also on the internet that I was raising money so that our campaign could pay for this. I mean, it was just a pack of lies. It was a complete political frame up. So I don't want to say more about that, except that it was just a bunch of garbage. And after 2 years of being investigated, the Senate Intelligence Committee in their 5th report acknowledged that they actually thanked me for my cooperation, and they acknowledged that there were no findings, essentially. But of course, the media never acknowledged that. And to this day, I'm still, regularly smeared. But it's important to recognize that as a badge of honor, that if you have become a threat to the powers that be, that's really good. Gandhi, has this continuum. First, they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win, so that says we're at stage 3, maybe 3 out of 4, that's really quite something. In my own lifetime, we went through 1, 2, and 3. And so that's really great. And I really encourage people, if they're smearing you, just make sure you are debunking their smears publicly, because otherwise they will Assange you. They will try to drum up a myth and create your some criminality. They will try to create a myth of your criminality, and then they will go after you. So you really have to fight it publicly. But otherwise, take it as a badge of honor and keep fighting. And with that, I want to return to the matter at hand, both the larger issue of democracy. But before we do that, I'm really, I'm just so mindful of how we are all now being, propagandized for the bigger war, and for, bigger war budgets and more war spending. And all these things that, Matt, you were talking about, that I was talking about, all these existential crises that we're facing could be readily solved, in the blink of an eye, but we're always told we don't have the money. Well, where's the money? The money is in the military. So I would love, because I've heard you talk about this so compellingly, because you've been there, you've been on the front lines, you put your own life at risk within this military beast, and you saw what a scam these wars are. As observers, we see that they don't make us safer. In fact, they do far worse. They make us far less safe. They make the whole world unstable and unsafe, just to look at, the recent wars within our lifetime. I mean, what's been their consequence? Look at the 68 regime change operations conducted by the US of A since the Second World War, 68. How many of them have come out well? Zero. They just create chaos and poverty and violence, which lasts for generations. Look at Guatemala, look at El Salvador, look at Iran, look at Libya, look at Afghanistan. So to the observer, it's really clear that as Gandhi and others have said, and MLK, and, this is not how we solve problems, but you have unique credibility, which is why I really want you to be my voice, our voice in the US Senate, to make the case for why we need other forms of security, not to be spending 50% of our discretionary congressional budget on the military and on the Pentagon. So I would just love for you to say a few words to that effect. How do you, as a 3-time combatant in these recent wars, how are you going to make the case before the US Senate to cut the military budget?
I mean, what I've pledged to do is, be the worst thing that ever happened to them in the Senate. I've learned a lot in my time in the Marine Corps, 10 years in the Marine Corps, and I regret a lot of it. There's, I'm not gonna get into that tonight, but there are things I learned and things I come to understood. And one of the things was this saying that the Marines had: no better friend, no worse enemy. And that would be the way I would approach things in the US Senate, is no better friend, no worse enemy. And that those who were there to benefit their donors, which is the vast majority of them, or whose first instinct is to protect their political careers, their political advantage, they would be my enemy. I have no problem using that word, because I need to be a friend to the people, and I'm the understanding of what I come through, what I've seen, the racket that particularly, say, the military spending is. But we see that with everything else. We see it with healthcare. We see that with agriculture. Why are we going to have these food shortages now? Well, because for decades now, the US government policy has been to allow for the maximization of profit by massive agribusiness companies that have completely gotten rid of all those decades of supply management policies that we had that so successfully, one, kept American farmers in business, kept particularly small farmers, but two, allowed us to navigate the ups and downs that come with agriculture. And now we're being warned about this massive agricultural shortfall coming. They're going to say it's all because of the Russians. And the reality is, though, is that no, it's because we have allowed for decades agribusiness, the big meat and dairy and produce manufacturers, because that's what they are, manufacturers, to dictate what the policies are going to be for our government in terms of what we, the people, have as our agricultural basis. And that's just one thing we could talk about, again, healthcare, education, pharmaceutical, but with the military in particular, I can recall being in working for the Pentagon in 2008, being at waiting to go into a meeting. It was an acquisition meeting, and there were representatives from the defense industry there. I don't know where these two particular gentlemen I'm going to talk about came from, but they were standing outside the meeting, and I could hear them talking about, at that point in 2008, there was discussions about shifting from Iraq into Afghanistan. And people probably remember that the wars shifted, the violence in Iraq went down. So then we surged into Afghanistan, right? And there was a big discussion all throughout the Pentagon the summer of 2008. And these two defense industry gentlemen, who I feel comfortable kind of saying they were very representative of their peers. Very plainly, as I stood there waiting to go into this meeting, listen to them talk, said, man, I hope we don't go into Afghanistan. We just need to get back to business as usual. Well, today, one of the things I was reading about this Pentagon budget increase, which will be an increase of, yeah, as you said, either 31 or $70 billion, depending upon how you look at it. But let's just say $31 billion, which is twice the amount of money we need for COVID protections, but that we are told we don't have the money for that. We don't have the $15 billion to protect our people from COVID, but we've got $31 billion more to give to the Pentagon. You know, one of the things that I came across was this declaration, basically, that, you know, the role of the Pentagon is no longer to face terrorism, but to face, as they call, peer threats or pacing threats, or whatever terminology they come up. Basically, the idea about what I heard in 2008, getting back to normal. Right? Getting back to buying the aircraft carriers, getting back to buying the bomber planes, getting back to buying the nuclear tipped cruise missiles, things like that, making sure the money is not going towards actual fighting of these wars, but going to the contractors, right? Going to Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, you know, and so that racket that exists and the way that that $800 billion flows into the Pentagon, that money then goes to the defense contractors. The defense contractors then hire lobbyists and think tank people and put their people in the media. And then next year it'll be not $813 billion, but $840 billion or $850 billion. A friend of mine who's a journalist is coming up with a pool, basically, see who can come closest in terms of how soon we hit a $1 trillion Pentagon budget, which probably, I guess, in probably 4 or 5 years, if we're going at this rate. So, you know, the racket of it and exposing that racket. And as I said, doing everything I can to make me the most hated man in the US Senate among my fellow senators. Because I think that's the only way, you know, that's the only thing that stops this corruption. Right. And it's the same, it's kind of the same principle that we take being a third party, being an outside party, is that you have no leverage when you're inside the Democratic or Republican parties, none. It's, you know, I said this the other day, I heard someone else say it before me, you know, and I'm, you know, obviously, you know, I'm a big believer that plagiarism is the most sincere form of flattery. So I will just repeat what they say and pass it on as me. But it's the same, you know, kind of the same principle as, you know, in terms of workers. Like striking is what gives workers their leverage. It gives them their power. If they don't show up to work, if they keep showing up to work, they have no leverage over their employer. You know, it's the same thing too with voters. If you keep showing up and voting for the same party, you have no leverage. And so this idea, the same thing too, if we can get people into power who can exert that kind of leverage that we can exert as unions do when they go on strike. And just want to say a quick, you know, I think like most other folks on here at this call, very excited to see about the news about the Amazon union, right? Exactly. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my attitude going into it, is just to be an absolute nightmare and promising to be that. Look, I'm a big fan of FDR in many ways. I mean, there's things about him, of course, I don't like, you know, so, but, you know, in terms of who he was as a politician, and they hated FDR. I mean, they really hated him, you know, and I just quoted Smedley Butler, who said war's a racket and everything, but Smedley Butler was actually recruited to launch a coup against FDR by the bankers. I mean, this is all stuff that, like, a guy named Jonathan Katz has a new book out on all this, which is fantastic if people are interested. But right, I mean, this idea that they hated Roosevelt so much. When I say they, the capitalists, the bankers, the corporation CEOs, you know, they hated him. And what did FDR say? He said, "I welcome their hatred." And I think that's the right going into this. Is that how we have to do this? We have to remember who we are doing this for. And again, as I said earlier, and I know it's the case for Jill and the 100 people who are on this call, you know, we're all here because there are people in our lives. And it may be us, but people in our lives who are suffering because of government policy. And unless we're willing to put our bodies in front of the machine, you know, as you're doing right now, and I want to echo what you said about the FEC, So my brother is my treasurer, my sister is my custodian of records. None of us we're all political newbies in this sense. And we've had discussions about the FEC rules, how they are brilliantly vague. I mean, brilliantly vague. You mean it's in order to keep outsiders out. And if an outsider dares to come in like you did, Jill, and threaten the system, then there's a way to punish, because it's so vague that what they can apply to you, they're never going to apply to a Democrat or a Republican. So, but I think, I don't know if that really answers what you wanted me to get at. I certainly go into details until people's eyes roll back about the Pentagon, about the $15 billion aircraft carriers, the $15 billion submarines, the $2 billion airplanes, the new bombers, the B-21 Spirits, $2 billion a piece. So for 7 of those planes, we could have COVID protection for the next year, but we don't have the money for it, let alone all the other things, all the various, what costs. I mean, not just for us, but this is something that, our friend, our friend David Swanson, the folks at World Beyond War say all the time. Look, all the experts out there say it would cost $30 billion to eradicate global hunger. 30 billion. That's what the increase is this year for the Pentagon, at least 30 billion. That would, and if you want to talk about security, you think ending world hunger, you don't think that would make the United States more secure, right? I mean, but we know it's not about making the United States more secure. We know it's not about protecting the American people. We know it's about returning business to usual and making the corporations and then the politicians, and whether you want to describe this as legalized bribery or a protection racket that works at 2 sides of the same coin, right? Who's doing what for who? That's what it's really all about. So, I mean, and I have to imagine that, as I speak this about the military, my background with it, my familiarity with it, I think what brought you into this, if I'm not mistaken, was your background as a doctor. And same kind of thing, understanding the industry, seeing the wrongs of it, the harm it's causing, and then saying, I'm going to do something about this.
Yeah, totally. Just seeing so much wasted life and needless suffering. And I mean, for me, it was just seeing people sick from things they didn't need to be sick from, like
Right.
air pollution or cancer or learning disabilities and developmental disabilities from exposures like pesticides and mercury and stuff like that is readily avoidable,
Right.
and that I heard about. So I started reading about it, because I had 15 years of science education. So I could just start reading about it, and protect my family. And then I started working with Physicians for Social Responsibility, because we were saying,
Sure.
hey, this isn't fair. How come we can protect ourselves because we know how to read the literature, but other people don't, so we started participating in these campaigns to basically shut down polluting incinerators and clean up coal plants and try to transition to clean renewable energy and, recycle and reuse so we don't have a waste stream to start with. I mean, there were like really great solutions that were motherhood and apple pie, but the legislature couldn't sell it to the legislature because you don't have a lot of money in your pocket, to lobby and provide campaign contributions, and when I sort of saw that's how the system works, I got involved in campaign finance reform. We passed the clean elections law here in Massachusetts, which is the way this should be done. We should, the whole FEC approach to regulation through disclosure, we should have publicly funded, political campaigns, and we should have free air time for qualified candidates. That way the cost of elections goes way, way down and the public can afford to fund it. And, so on. We need a bunch of changes, but it's not rocket science. It's a discrete agenda that could be done. But when I saw that the Democratic Party in Massachusetts, we actually passed public financing in my state, in Massachusetts, through a referendum because the legislature wouldn't pass it.
Sure.
So we passed it as the people overwhelmingly by a 2-to-1 margin. And then the Democratic legislature, the progressive Democratic legislature, repealed it on a voice vote. So nobody could be held accountable, and that's what said to me, wow, if we want to be healthy, if we want to be able to prevent needless death, disability, and suffering, we got to clean up our political system, which is why I describe my trajectory as like moving from clinical medicine to political medicine to treat the mother of all illnesses, our sick political system,
Right.
that prevent, that's going to kill us from 1,000 things. We can't solve them one at a time while the whole system is so just corrupt and toxic. So yeah, that's how I wandered my way into it. But I really want to underscore for people that the changes we need to bring back our democracy, are also not rocket science. It's there's a lot to do, but there's kind of like there's a bunch of priorities that we could do, and among them is ranked choice voting and proportional representation, among other things, as well as ending voter suppression and ending party suppression, ensuring
Right.
that we not only have a right to vote, we have a right to vote for who we want. Because if you can just vote, but the candidates are all pre-selected by the money primaries, what good does it do you? You have various choices among shades of gray in the oligarchy, and or servants of the oligarchy, those who are sponsored by the oligarchy. What good does that do you? So I just want to make the point that it's a finite set of reforms. It's not really rocket science. I think most people who are probably tuned in, they're somewhat familiar with this, but I want to keep getting back to that. This is in our hands. We have the power to do this, and it's not rocket science. It's not some big mystery. It doesn't take a miracle. It really takes organizing. And that I used to think, oh, we'll never change people's minds. We'll never persuade people. And then I discovered, well, people are actually already persuaded. It's like they just need to hear that they have an option on their behalf, that millennials, Gen Zs, and Gen Xers, that student debt, we could end it like that, and
Right.
that will suddenly get people to want to engage the system and come out and vote. So it's not like rocket science. This myth of political apathy is really created in order to make us feel disempowered, like, oh, you could never get people interested. Actually, like, give us the microphone,
Right.
let us into the debate, people will be interested. Don't worry. So it's just as simple as getting the word out. And I want to just underscore for people that that's what the numbers show, and they continue to show. And, Biden is moving to the right now with his budget, because Democrats, they have this like ridiculous notion that you get more support by moving to the right. It's actually the opposite. That's why there was such a groundswell behind Bernie Sanders, because people liked the really progressive agenda, and that's why they were systematically prevented from hearing about what we had to offer, in 2012, 2016, 2020, because the Democrats in particular are terrified that people should hear. And remember that in 2016, at least, the largest voting bloc was people who were not voting.
Right. Right.
And you don't have such a big spoiler threat when you're not at the presidential level. So it is in some ways it's a much more strategic place to focus, which I think it's really awesome that your campaign can kind of be like a flagship campaign for us. When Greens broke through in Canada, the way they did that was by getting everybody nationally to pile on for one Green campaign, Elizabeth May, in one section of Canada. So she was like running for Congress, she was running for Parliament, but they had like national force really converged behind that campaign, lots of volunteers. And while we're talking about volunteers, I just want to put out the word. I heard on your last conversation with Medea Benjamin, that people can actually pick up and go to North Carolina and volunteer and help get Matt on the ballot. So, volunteers are really where this is at right now. If you don't have like a whole lot of spare cash these days, and most people don't, you can just, if you can get the time off and you can go down for a week and just, spend some 12-hour days at some, really great petition sites that the team can advise you on and give you guidance on and all that. That's a really great way. The more we can consolidate our efforts to help get Matthew on the ballot, it would just be really exciting, because so many people are really hurting for a voice. So with that, Matt, I would love for you to say a few words about the dynamics of your race. I've heard that there are
Sure.
5 candidates in the race, if I'm not mistaken, and I think the incumbent is not running,
Right.
which makes it kind of a very interesting, race in which you can really be a contender. So say a few things about that race.
Right. Thanks, Jill. And thanks for all that. And I'll say something about that. And then we're going to go to questions, because I see in the little box here, there's like 21 questions. Oh man. So,
wow. All right.
we'll put that on Rose to get us through all those. With the race here, and I want to go back to one thing, because what you said reminded me of on Monday, we were at the Moral, Reverend William Barber, who leads the Poor People's Campaign. He had a Moral Monday event, a Moral March on Monday. And, one of the things, as they have their speakers and they have the band and everything, and one of the things that they sing constantly is the spiritual, somebody is hurting my brother, somebody is hurting my sister, and that idea that we are witnessing people suffer. It goes back to what we were talking about before, the urgency of this campaign, the urgency to get on the ballot, right? To the urgency for people to donate and people to volunteer to get us on the ballot. We have 6 weeks to get the remaining signatures that we need. We have a great plan. We have a great organization. We have lots of people who have signed up who are going to give us their time. And we need the resources to make that come through. And then what you were saying, Jill, about people coming down, that's one of our parts of the plan, is to have people from out of state come and help us, who can give us a whole day or 2 days of their time, come to a certain festival or event where there's going to be 10,000 people, and they can get us 200-300 signatures over a couple of days. So there are different parts of the ballot access plan that we have here. I want to say they've done a great job putting it together. Tommy James, who's on this call, has been integral to that, along with Tony Ndege, Michael Trudeau, Wayne Turner. These guys have put together over the last few months a structure, an organization to get us the signatures, so that we can get on the ballot, so that people have someone on the ballot who believes that healthcare, housing, education, jobs are human rights, who believes that the war on drugs is destroying so many people in this country. We just had last week, the numbers came out for overdose deaths in North Carolina last year, a 40% increase in overdose deaths. And meanwhile, while 91% of the United States believes that marijuana should be legal, you can't get a vote on it in the U.S. Senate. You can't get a vote on it in the North Carolina state legislature. And so you have someone on the ballot who believes that ending the war on drugs is, again, an existential imperative for families, because how many people do we all know who are dealing with the lasting, and so much of this is so racist. It's the whole purposes of the war on drugs is racist in so many ways, but it extends and hits whites as well. How many people do we know in our lives who are still dealing with the consequences of a marijuana charge from 15 years ago? Let alone the 2.5 million brothers and sisters of ours who are in prisons. We're the biggest prison nation in the planet, and then the other side of it, the substance abuse and the addiction that's treated as a crime rather than as a public health issue. The number of people that we know who've been lost to overdose, the number of people I know, I have my life, who have seen shattered by that. So, what we're up against here to describe the dynamics, and then we'll go to questions, is Richard Burr is retiring. Richard Burr is a career politician, or nearly a career politician. He's been in Congress for over 30 years, or almost 30 years. He is, I believe, if he was walking down the street in North Carolina, no one would recognize him. That's his legacy for North Carolina. He's been great for the Intelligence Committee. He's been the chair of the Intelligence Committee, and he's overseen the torture, the rendition, Guantanamo Bay, the mass spying on all Americans by the CIA and the NSA. That's Burr's legacy. So he won't be missed by anyone in North Carolina because they don't know him. The Democrats cleared their primary out, so a centrist Democrat will be the nominee. So there is no primary really for the Democrats down here. Sherry Beasley has been anointed as a Democratic nominee. Basically, the primary in May is just it's just a ritual at this point. Doesn't mean anything. And Beasley is she's not going to do anything that the DNC and the Democratic Party and the White House do not want her to do. So if they don't want her to vote on marijuana legalization, she's not going to do it. They want her to vote on increasing the Pentagon budget. She is going to do it. She's not going to stand up and say we need to do something about climate change. She's not going to say anything about rent control. I mean, on and on and on. So the idea that somehow we overlap with the Democrats is absolutely inane, because we don't. We have more in common with the libertarians than we do with the Democrats. And the Democrats have way more in common with the Republicans than they do with us. On the Republican side, it's one person after another. There are four. They're all one has Trump's endorsement, and more or less McCrory, maybe not, but 3 of the 4 all want Trump's endorsement. So it tells you what that's like on the Republican side. And even the other Republican, Pat McCrory, who was the governor of North Carolina, formerly the mayor of Charlotte, who I think maybe 10 years ago you would call like a Mitt Romney type Republican. Now, if you go on his website right now, he's demanding that we have to have photo ID because of all the illegals coming over the border, a very nativist type of disgusting, obscene, hateful approach. So that's what we're up against, as well as, too, there's a libertarian on the ballot, Shannon Bray, great guy. I respect him quite a bit. We disagree on a lot, even on issues like ending the war on drugs. We disagree on the fact that we're both for decriminalization, but that's where he ends it. And I say the amount of all these resources that for 50 years we've been putting into sheriff's office, into the DEA, into police departments, into prisons, we now must put those resources into helping the people who are struggling, who are living with substance abuse and addiction. So even on issues that we supposedly agree with them on, we really don't. So that kind of gives people the idea here, but also the urgency. If you want to see these types of things in the debates, letting people in North Carolina know there is an opportunity, a choice to do something different, as well as to have someone on the ballot to vote who's going to do these things, then we got to get on the ballot. And so I need your help. And, donations and volunteers, please. And Rose is going to come back on and shepherd us into the Q&A. But just make that pitch right now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So to answer what Matt said about it will be my job to get us through 28 questions. Well, since we don't actually have all night, I'm sure it actually could be an interesting discussion. I'm not going to be able to get to 28 questions. And I didn't, there's been just such a fascinating conversation. I didn't want to disrupt it, but we could get to at least a few. So, just everyone, thank you so much for participating, for putting your questions in. And like I said, I'm going to leave my email. So if there's questions you would like to send to me that I could forward to keep the conversation going, please do that. And I'll be leaving my email shortly. All right. From Nissan Picture, Matthew, what are your top 5 issues And what's your strategy to address those issues?
Okay. First, if you go to our website, matthewhofersenate.org, you'll see an issues page there, and you can see the 7 or 8 different parts of our platform that we've written out. And certainly there's more that we could talk about. I mean, there's just, you're doing something like this, you're as broad as our entire society is. So we certainly want to talk about all types of issues. But in order to top 5, I can kind of go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first being democracy, strengthening, reform, because basically Jill talked about this quite a bit. The different things we need to strengthen, make our democracy more inclusive, grow it, expand it. If we don't do that, none of the other things we're talking about will ever happen. If we do not basically break the system and rebuild it and reimagine it so it serves people, we're not going to be able to do anything on climate change, on healthcare, on housing, because it's structured not to allow us to do that. The whole purpose is to keep the status quo, keep the those who are benefiting, keep them benefiting. And meanwhile, you see all of it worsen otherwise, right? Whether it be for individuals, for working families, for our society at large, for the international community. So the first is democracy reform. The second is the climate crisis. I think that's probably self-explanatory, right? Because it's an existential crisis. In the sense that, look, the reports that have been coming out, they get worse and worse. And the one thing that the scientists keep saying is that we were wrong. Our models were too conservative. To quote the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Planning Committee, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the UN's body on climate change, to quote them from a report about a month ago, it's coming harder and faster than we expected. And that reality is going to really hit us, I think, in ways that we don't see, which gets into the third thing I have, which is the Economic Bill of Rights, which, if, as we know, this past year, a substantial part of the food inflation we saw came because half of our country was basically on fire because of drought and because of drought and heat waves. And what happens is you lose crops, and most of the crops we use go towards feeding animals, right? Feeding our animal agriculture. And so a lot of the inflation we saw last year in food prices came from climate change. So if we don't have something about economic bill of rights that stabilizes people, protects people, as well as ensures prosperity for future generations, we might as well not do anything about the first 2 things, democracy reform and climate change. The fourth one is ending the wars, both the wars overseas and at home. I did happen to see, actually, I just glanced at the questions, and Janie, who is one of our rock star campaign volunteers, she gets out there and she hustles every week getting us signatures. Janie, who's I believe she's at UNC, she said that so well, just in the Q&A here, about how the military and the police are the 2 arms of the body, right? One is the domestic law enforcement and the other is the international law enforcement. It keeps the system in power, it keeps them in place, and the suffering that it puts upon people. Look, the wars overseas or the wars at home. Look at the issues at the border. That's anywhere else in the world. If any other country was doing what we do at our border, we would call that a crime against humanity. And so I think for moral purposes, but the instability that those things bring as well, and then in terms of the fifth issue, I don't think it's an issue so much in terms of like, this is the policy we're going to do. We're going to get this out. We're going to, it's more about building and growing a movement. And so I'll say a lot that, look, getting on the ballot is incredibly important. Getting into the debates, incredibly important. Being on the ballot in November is incredibly important. But what's more important is growing this movement, is building this party, is giving people this alternative. And if after this campaign, we can then say, look, we motivated 3 or 4 other people to run in 2024. And then those 3 or 4 other people motivate 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 people to run in 2026. So those are my 5 issues there. And yeah, I don't know, Jill, if you want to add anything to that or.
I think you totally covered the bases. So maybe we'll let Rose get the next hitter in. Thank you.
Matt, this is from Dave Heller. Matt, will you be making ranked choice voting and hopefully multi-seat ranked choice voting a part of your platform?
Yes, and it is. It's in the first part of the platform. That democracy reform, for lack of a better term. We have I can't remember right now. We have a much more snappier term than democracy reform on the website. But it's everything from abolishing the filibuster, right, to abolishing the electoral college, to ranked choice voting and proportional representation. Giving one of the things I think with a 2-party system, it allows it to be captured by money. It allows it to be captured by special interest groups. They're able to control those groups because there aren't any alternatives. They only have to buy off 2 parties. If you have 4, 5, 6 parties, particularly with ranked choice voting and proportional representation, what I like so much about it is it makes the election more about issues, more about economic and political philosophy. It means that voters are going to the ballot box and voting their conscience, voting their values, voting what actually is going to be best for their families, rather than doing some type of red versus blue, Fox News versus MSNBC type of political jujitsu in order to choose which is the lesser of the 2 evils. So ranked choice voting is incredibly important to me, and proportional representation is also very important to me, and it is an aspect. And Jill, I know you've got a lot of experience with this, so if you want to add something to it.
I think in the interests of maybe getting more questions in, I'll just let that stand because I think you've totally covered the bases. So good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Matt. From Chris Leduc, would you be willing to endorse what he's calling the baby step bill, which would 1, declare climate crisis a clear and present danger, 2, prohibit cruel, unusual, or degrading punishment, and 3, define healthcare as a human right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not familiar with that term, the baby step bill.
Yeah, neither was I, but
okay. Jill, are you familiar with that?
I'm not either, but it sounds like the right thing. So give us a link or something.
Yeah,
Chris,
absolutely.
we can find out more about it.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. But yeah, absolutely.
Sounds like a no-brainer. Absolutely.
Yeah.
all right. I once again am apologizing in advance. This is somebody who was at last week's webinar with Medea Benjamin, and just I'm hoping every time I'll get closer to pronouncing your name right. From Nikalananda, aloha, Matt. Mahalo for standing for office for U.S. Senate in North Carolina. Would you speak about what has drawn you to the Green Party, what inspired you to seek elected office, and a few of the most significant items / issues with your campaign, which I know you've been touching upon?
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks a lot for tuning back in. I appreciate it, and aloha as well. Yeah, I mean, actually sitting here with Jill Stein, I don't know if Jill remembers it. Certainly I knew of Jill. I voted for Jill, which was kind of nice because I've met a number of presidents in my life and I never voted for any of them, so I never voted for George H.W. Bush, never voted for George W. Bush, never voted for Bill Clinton. So it was kind of nice to meet someone who I voted for president. But Jill, we were at the, I don't know if you remember this, is either October of 2017 or October 2018, there was a People's March on the Pentagon. And it was like a very gray, cold October day, windy. And we walked from the Pentagon City Mall over to the Pentagon. And they had a stage set up. And I remember I was carrying a Veterans for Peace banner. And I was talking to my friend Tarek. And then I looked over and you're walking next to me. And I just remember kind of having that shock of oh my God, this is Jill Stein. This is someone who's done so much. And my appreciation for your courage, my appreciation for your bravery, for what you willingly put yourself into, right? In terms of what was going to be thrown at you. And I don't know if you probably didn't have any idea maybe of what you're currently going through, but in terms of, you knew going into it, what you were going to step into. There's a scene from the television series about the Chernobyl accident, where they've got to send 3 people in to find something or take a measurement or do whatever. And these guys have to volunteer, knowing what they're walking into, knowing that they're going to be dead in a matter of days. And they do it because they know it's the right thing to do. And walking next to you at that point, that's how I felt about you, about someone who walked into, look, my dad was a firefighter. Him and his buddy Jay Bender used to go first guys into the house. This is in the 70s when, houses caught on fire all the time. People smoked in bed. There was no smoke detectors, right? I mean, different world back then, and my dad and Jay used to go into the house, and it always felt that, like, your willingness to do that. And thinking about it today, and I thought about that moment, and now this question brings it up to me. So just want to say thank you for being that inspiration that I'm being asked about, because I don't know if I would do this if I didn't see other people like you who had done it before and been willing to take it on, and it's the same thing too. It's the inspiration I have with the people who are around me in the campaign, the good intentions that everyone is bringing. And, we argue about stuff. We don't get along sometimes, but the reality of who they are and what they want to accomplish, I'm very cognizant of that, and I'm very lucky and grateful to be a part of it. So, yeah, I mean, I wonder for you, if there was you had inspiration. I know you talked about being in healthcare and everything, but for you, what kind of inspiration was there in terms of who you saw that you said, that's someone I want to become,
and thank you for your very kind words. I mean, I've always felt like I was just a workhorse, and that I happened to be tricked into running for office back in 2001. I was asked by some Greens in my state party, and I wasn't a member of any political party because I really hadn't seen any political party worth joining in the first 50 years of my life. And I was asked by the Greens, well, actually at the time I was like advocating to shut down incinerators and clean up coal plants and, have recycling programs instead of, incineration. And so I was already doing public advocacy, and the pitch to me was, well, just do it to a bigger audience, just bring those issues and call it a governor's campaign. And I was like naive enough to think, oh, sure, that sounds like a logical, simple thing to do, and I never would have done it had I known what was involved. But like, once you're in it, it's hard to back out. And enough of us got together and became a team in Massachusetts to get on a ballot, and then to fight these fights, and then to struggle with the media and trick it occasionally into covering us, and to fight our way into a debate and actually get it televised and see that in fact they were like foolish enough to have done an online instant viewer poll while the debate was going on TV. And when I walked out of the debate hall, which was just a TV studio, it wasn't live, I was mobbed by the press, having been completely ignored during the debate because the things that I was talking about, like green jobs, like this was back, in 2002, green jobs, free college, at the time we called it single payer healthcare. Healthcare is a human right, bilingual education, things like that, scaling down the military. They were completely ignored. They just went over like lead balloons. And so I thought, oh, well, at least I tried, incredible disappointment. And then I walked out and I was mobbed by the press, who told me I had won the debate on the instant online viewer poll. And apparently I had changed places with Romney. The two of us were like going back and forth ahead of the Democrat. We were vying for 1 and 2. And so suddenly this light bulb went off in my head that, oh my God, we don't have to persuade people. People are already with us, And so at any rate, I just felt like I went into this out of like total desperation, went into political work out of complete desperation because nothing else was working. And then I came out of the first campaign like totally inspired and really excited that, wow, nothing can stop us now. And that's why I kept going. I never had a goal that I was going to be a candidate or that I was going to be like someone else or following in somebody's footsteps. It was just like I got tricked into doing it. And then one thing followed another. But, like my role models, I'd say, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, people like that I never I wasn't like trying to be like them, but was just inspired by the fight. So just kind of like kept putting one foot in front of the other to keep the fight going. And I sort of feel like for me, discovering the Green Party was like discovering a big extended family. And yeah, we don't always all get along. We don't always see things eye to eye, but we kind of share some basic, deep vision and values. And for me, that's just like really grounding and sustaining. And, for me, it's like it becomes an end in of itself to just be a part of that community. It changes your world immediately.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions because there's 2 more here I would really like to ask. Adam Guyman asks about what are your thoughts on protecting disability rights? And being disabled myself and having cared for many years my late husband, who was severely disabled, that is an important question to me as well.
Yeah, and I'm people may or may not know I'm disabled as well. I have a brain injury from my time in the Marine Corps and the wars. And thanks, Adam, for that question and for bringing up this topic. And Rose can tell you, there are times like I can't do things. And I think the first thing when I hear about disability rights is I think about how do we make this a community issue? One of the ways I do this campaign is being able to rely on people like Rose or people like Dave or Salim or the folks from the North Carolina Green Party or Matt Scolar or all these other people I can run through, in sense of like who I can rely upon. And I think, I'm very fortunate that I have that team. And I think a lot of people don't though. And okay, well then how as a community can we help people with disabilities prosper, live full lives, navigate the obstacles that their disabilities unfortunately put up for them? I certainly, I see it as well too. I mean, I couldn't work for 5 years because of my disability, because of my invisible wounds from the war. I couldn't work for 5 years. And I was fortunate that I had family and friends who could help me, but a lot of people don't have that. So how do we support people who, through no fault of their own, or even if it is their fault, I mean, we're I think we're compassionate, understanding, caring people. How do we help people live full lives? How do we help people live lives that are satisfying and where they can give back and be a part of their community. You know, one of the things I've come to learn when you look at Social Security disability, other forms of disability, really doesn't do much. People can't afford to live on their own. People can't afford, and they certainly can't get the help that they need to navigate, to deal with, to overcome whatever it is that they are going through life with. You know, I think it's something that, you know, as a legislator, you have to always keep in mind, you know, just as you always have to keep in mind the racial injustices, the economic injustices, and how those things are always at play, always a factor. I think it's the same thing too. We have to understand people's circumstances, you know. And one of the things that I'm horrified by with this with the COVID crisis, with the pandemic, are the potentially millions of people that we now have with disabilities because of long COVID. I mean, you hear very little about this, and this kind of laissez-faire attitude, or this kind of devil-may-care attitude by our politicians during COVID. Oh, most people who are dying are old, you know, or you know, well, or what's really disgusting to me is that they didn't bother to get vaccinated. That's disgusting to me, that whole crowd. You know, they're still our brothers and sisters, whether they got vaccinated or not. And like the aspect of even that with COVID, where people with disabilities can't get the vaccination. I mean, so there's this thing, this idea of disability rights and what it means encompasses so much. And Jill, your thoughts, being a doctor and all.
I just so agree with everything you've said, and with the, you know, with the thrust of the question, which is that people who are differently abled, you know, are differently abled. I mean, we're all differently abled. Some people have particular challenges and other like astounding strengths. And, you know, I feel like we all benefit from ensuring that people with different abilities are full participants in society. And instead of paying for bombs and, you know, guns that destroy people, instead we can pay for adaptations and for personal assistance and for caregivers that ensure that everyone is living to the full, you know, the full measure of their abilities, and we all benefit. And I feel like it's just so outrageous that we are burning our resources in war and reckless profiteering by the war contractors, when we could be using that money to be sustaining and enriching our lives across the board. And that includes ensuring disability rights.
Right.
Totally. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you both. And the last question of the night is from Ahmed Salim, who's actually our campaign filmmaker. And it's a great question. It's both Jill and Matt. The largest group of voters in North Carolina are registered as unaffiliated, approximately 35%. The biggest argument against voting Green is that I love what they stand for, but there's no way a third party can win. What's your logical appeal to that mindset?
To the idea that a third party can't win.
Yes, well, you know, especially pointing out that 35% of the voters are unaffiliated.
Right, right. Which is now the biggest voting block in North Carolina are unaffiliated voters. I think people are desperate. One of the things I've noticed, whether it's if wherever I am, because I got asked it by a journalist the other day, how often are people bringing up Ukraine to you and the war in Ukraine? And I say, you know, not very often. I mean, people do on social media and you know, but like what I tend to get from people who I first encounter about the campaign is, honest to God, excitement and enthusiasm for something different. And I've even seen it when I've petitioned. I certainly haven't petitioned as much as folks on the campaign have, but when I've been out there, it's excitement for something different. It's excitement for something that can change something, really change something. And I hear this from people. They don't say, "Oh, I'm a green too. I'm excited." I hear this from people who are like, "Yeah, I know I'm not a socialist. I don't agree with you guys, but you need to be on the ballot." You know, like that type of, we need change. We need something. We need more democracy. I think the idea of it can't be successful is belied by the history in the United States, where we've seen minor parties become major parties. The Republican Party, the best example of that, probably. But look, I look at it two ways. What I believe we need to do. We need to grow this as a major party. As the Republicans continue to move into the Trump part of their party, as the Democrats, as Jill was saying, move more to the right, and they welcome in the Bill Kristols, the David Frums, those types, right? The Liz Cheneys, the Mitt Romneys get welcomed in the Democratic Party, which I think is something that's going to de facto happen, if not in name, but de facto at least. As they move right, that's a huge chunk of the American public. And again, remember that. Go and look at our platform. There's nothing on our platform that doesn't have majority public opinion, or at least plurality opinion. Nothing. There's nothing on there. Again, marijuana legalization has a 91% approval rate in this country. 91%. In terms of all the things we're talking about, the American public supports it. So it's, the idea is that we grow this party into a major party because there's room for it, there's a want for it, there's a need for it. That puts pressure, of course, on the political system to change, on the Democrats and Republicans to change. But then the other part of it too is that they then have to make the calculus of either trying to of ignoring us and losing votes, look, the Democrats here in North Carolina in 2004 had 47% of registered voters. They now have 33%. The Republicans in 2004 had 33%. They still have 33%. Independent voters went from 17 to like 35% or something like that. So it wasn't like the Democrats lost all these voters and they went to the Republicans. No, they became unaffiliated. And so people want something different. And so what might happen as well is that we gain some major victories. But what happens is, as we put pressure on the Democrats, they say, okay, we are now going to adopt Medicare for all. And so while we grow as a party, we put this pressure on the Democratic Party. They in turn try and adopt our issues, which we've seen happen. How many of Jill's issues, and how many, when Jill was running on Green New Deal, Medicare for all, then all of a sudden Bernie Sanders comes along and says these things, right? So there's a lot that can happen here by growing this party, whether it's to grow the party it's both things, to put pressure, to have that, again, that leverage I was talking about. The only thing they're afraid of is losing their seats. That's the only thing they're afraid of. And that's what we must make them do. And so I think it's very likely, very possible, and more than that, it's necessary for us to run these campaigns and do them very effectively and put the fear of God into these parties. That's what we have to do in order to achieve victories for the people, but then also to grow our party as well. And Jill?
Agree with all. And just to throw some more numbers behind this, that was really amazing to hear that independents have basically doubled.
Yeah.
I don't know what in North Carolina. Over what period of time is that?
20 years. 20 years.
Yeah. It's really relentless. And this is what we see nationally as well.
And they've almost all come out of the Democratic Party too. The Republicans have remained flat. The Democrats have lost. Right. Exactly. So you see where we line up with it. Yeah.
And there's no doubt about what's driving this, because people are really being thrown under the bus, and, and the Democrats couldn't even have a vote on Medicare for all. They wouldn't They
Right.
refused to force the vote. They couldn't vote for a $15 minimum wage, which was
Right.
the promise. They couldn't renew the moratorium on evictions with 11 million people at risk.
Right.
All that they talk the talk sometimes, but they never walk the walk. And people are increasingly desperate. 29, I mean, these are just some amazing numbers that I've been collecting. 29%, and this is like, I don't know, I want to say Pew or Gallup, I don't remember which, but respectable polling agencies, 29% of Americans have faith in the media. Oh, actually, that was a Reuters poll.
Yeah.
29% have faith in the media. And this was the lowest among 46 modern, industrial economies. That's, so like when the media bashes us, that's okay because, because the public hates them anyhow. So, it's kind of good to be bashed by them. 25% of the public trusts government, 25%, why were there controversies around COVID treatment? Because nobody trusts our regulatory institutions, which is the first thing we have to do if we want to agree on public health policies. We need to stop the revolving door, and we need to stop the wholesale purchases of our institutions. But 25% trust government. If you are asking young people, it's 21%. Further polls of young people show that 50% are hopeless and feel, and it's more like 2/3 feel that they've been abandoned and betrayed and lied to by our government. And with 50% feeling hopeless, 25% have actually considered harming themselves in the past 2 weeks.
Oh my God.
So, I mean, to my mind, plus, like our survival, our longevity is actually diminishing. And it used to just be Caucasians without a high school education whose longevity, whose lifespan was reducing. This is, work done by this couple. I think they're economists at Princeton. He got the Nobel Prize for it.
Yeah.
I forget his name offhand, but this is very well-regarded work, these so-called diseases of despair. We are a society of despair right now because we are governed by ruling parties that are worthy of despair, and that have driven us to despair. So never doubt for a moment that people will jump at the chance to breathe again when they've been suffocated, really, increasingly for decades. So forget that bullshit about, people say you'll never win. Well, people are being, brainwashed, on all sides to think that, but they don't really think that. And all they really have to do is hear that they could have a future, and we could have a democracy, and we could have healthcare, and we could have free college, and we could end student debt. And we can, on an emergency basis, move our military expenditures into rescuing the climate, and it would work. And it would, and it would be, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy no matter what, but this is really doable. And, and there would just be such a transformation of society and a sense of community and all that. This is really doable. So never accept for a minute their effort to persuade you to be hopeless and to be powerless. If you think you're powerless, then you are powerless. But in the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have it, just to look at the numbers. People are there. All they have to do is really hear it. And then our future is transformed. So I really urge people to seize the moment for this transformation in this campaign, and to throw in and volunteer and be a part of it and tell your friends. And, and let's make it happen. This is a really wonderful, exciting campaign. And I'm so grateful, Matt, that that you are running. And thank you, Rose, and to the whole team for making this happen. And the future is ours for the taking. So let's seize it and make it happen.
Right. And just was reminded of two other numbers. 62% of Americans want a third party, and 85% of Americans want major structural electoral change, like major structural change to our elections, major 85%. So absolutely. And yeah, we have to make it, we're not going to grow. The party is not going to grow a third party, a Green Party, a People's Party, a leftist party, whatever you want to describe it as, is not going to grow just like the weeds are growing, in my mulch beds right now. It's just not going to come up. We have to do it. We have to build it. This is it. I know it's hard. I know it doesn't look easy. I know what they say, right? I mean, so we have to build it, and we can build it. Others have done it before. We can do it now. We're working off of what's already been done with what, Jill has done, Ralph has done, Howie's done, so many others have done. So, I appreciate that question, Salim, and Rose, back to you.
Yes. Okay. Now that there will be some closing remarks by Matt and Jill. This has been I know we're going a little over time, but I think this has been a really exciting discussion. And I think people are, enjoying it. We got a lot of people who decided to spend a Friday night here, and it's really, it's been such an honor to be able to host people like Dr. Jill Stein and Matthew Ho. And what has Jill said several times? Matthew Ho, this is going to be a flagship campaign for the Green Party. This is an important campaign for the Green Party because we need to get the word out there. We need to get candidates like Matthew Ho running as Greens. And I think we can all agree that Matthew Ho is an extraordinary candidate, and his campaign has the potential to make history. But first we have to get him on the ballot. And it's a real challenge because we need to get over 14,000 signatures. And this month is going to be a make or break for us. That means we need each and every one of you to pitch in and make Matt's campaign happen. Campaigns cost money, and we all know that the duopoly has massive amounts of corporate money. And that's why they're not beholden to the people. They're beholden to the corporations. But the good news is that the people can invest their money in a candidate like Matthew Ho. And that's what I'm going to be asking you to do tonight. So if you believe in Matt, and you believe we need this campaign to happen, please do whatever you can to help out. We're paying people in North Carolina $3 a signature to petition for Matt. The maximum amount an individual can give during the primary cycle is $2,900 per person. That would pay for almost 1,000 signatures. So I'm holding out for a hero tonight. Do we have any heroes who can give $2,900 tonight? If you can give $2,900, let us know in the chat so we can thank you. I'm really hoping got some heroes out there tonight. Oh, I understand. I know that that's a big amount to ask for, but that's why, but I have to do it because we really want to make this happen. So tell me, do we have anybody who could do $1,500? At $3 a signature, that would be 500 signatures. That's a major chunk of what we need. If you can do 1,500, let us know in the chat. Thank you, Donna Kaiser, for donating 50. Please donate what you can. I'm asking for big numbers because we need this campaign to happen big time. But if anyone here could be a hero who could give 1,000, Matt's an amazing candidate. You might end up giving 1,000 over the next 6 months. So why not do it now when we really need this money to get on the ballot? If you could do 1,000, please let us know in the chat. I would have to look up election law. Somebody is asking if it's tax deductible. I know a certain amount should be. No. Okay. That's why I didn't want to just go and answer that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I know on some donations, there's a certain amount, but apparently not on this. So unfortunately, the answer is no.
But you get a lot of karma credit for
That's
it.
right.
You will definitely
So it's
get
just as
that.
good.
Yeah, right.
All right, let's move on to 500. Can anybody do $500? Oh, Kathy Gilbert's going to do $1,000 over the next month.
Woo!
Yeah,
Hey.
from my home state of Florida, Kathy Gilbert. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you so much. That's, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Kathy is a longtime Green, a longtime supporter of Green candidates and Green values. And I'm honored to know her from our work in Florida together. Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah. Yeah, that means a lot. That really does. And same thing to Donna and you know, Sandy, you know, the folks who are giving as well. It does. Everything helps. Everything helps. So thank you.
Okay, now, any champions out there who could do 500? 500 is still going to buy us a lot of signatures, as is 250. So if we got any heroes out there who could do $250, that would make a big difference. And, you know, I know because I don't have a lot. It's not like Manuel Fiadero. I hope I said your name right, but right on. It's going to do $500.
Well,
thank you, brother. Thank you.
Sandy,
Thank you.
I did not see the amount you're doing, but I see people thanking you. So I want to thank you. It's a matter of being able to keep up with everything in the chat. But thank you, Sandy. So we do have some heroes in this audience tonight. And I thank you so much. All right. So now I'm asking, do we have some working class heroes out there who could do $100? Because if you could do $100, enough of that, I see 3 people have raised.
All right. Thank you.
Their hands.
right.
Thank you, Franz.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Franz.
That is great. All right. So, you know, we're getting something. We're definitely getting some heroes in the audience tonight. And, you know, to me, all of us who are standing against this 2-party system and trying to make a difference, we're all heroes. And I so appreciate that. David, thank you for doing 50. If we got Jody, thank you for doing 100.
Wow. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jody.
Thank you so much. You know, Terrence, 25.
Awesome.
That's great. Okay. Joy being her own boss. has taken $100 out of her own account and isn't going to tell her boss. Ellen, 150.
Oh,
Thank
Joy.
you, Ellen.
Right,
Oh, thank you,
Ellen.
Joy, and Ellen
Woo!
Barfield, who is a hero within the Veterans for Peace community, someone who I really look up to. So the fact that Ellen,
Oh, wow.
thank you, Ellen. And Ellen's been giving us money before too. So this is just, yeah, this means all the world to me, Ellen. It really does. Thank you. And Derek Shapiro.
100 from down.
Thank you,
Oh,
Derek.
Shapiro, thank
yay.
you.
Wow.
Thank you. Well, sometimes a gal holding out for some heroes gets some.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. This is great, and if there's people out there who, are really struggling, remember, you can volunteer. You could come out to North Carolina. That is something to contact us, because we're looking for out-of-state volunteers to come in. The campaign could deal with things like your transportation, finding you a place to stay. I am going to be in North Carolina for the Hemp Fest from April 20th through 23rd. And normally, if I were saying I were going to North Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina for a Hemp Fest, people would have a different idea of why I was there. But oh yeah. Oh, and Leanne
Oh,
just
wow.
gave 200.
Woo.
Leanne Bartlett, who's part of the
Yeah.
campaign. She's our
Yeah.
regional
Woo.
lead in Hickory. She is, gosh, and she's been given $50 a month. I mean, this
Oh,
is
man.
Leanne, you're the best. You
Wow.
really are. I said that the other day because you went out and got us a ton of signatures the other day and printed up all these flyers for us and everything else. And now you're doing this. So you really are the best, Leanne. That's not just me, but thank you.
And
Thank
Phil
you.
Lembo just did 200. And
Oh,
Phil Lembo
man.
is also somebody who is a volunteer
Oh,
with this
incredible.
campaign, who is, helping us out with all sorts of things, including our website. And, just to tell people a little inside stuff with campaigns. Sometimes you have a campaign manager who doesn't understand websites and has to figure them out. And it's hard. But we have people like Phil Lembo with us who are making it easier by doing the work. And so thank you so much, in addition to all that work, to give $200. So, that's great. And it's so
Thank you, Phil.
appreciated what people are doing. And again, what I was saying is, if you could volunteer, or even if you have $10, $15, $20 that you could put in, that adds up. If we had enough people do that, these are the things that are going to get us on the ballot. Because like I said, the Democrats, the Republicans, they don't have to worry about these things. Everything's paid for them, but it's not the people like you who are paying for it. And that's why they don't answer to the people. They answer to the corporations.
Right.
And when we do this, we're investing in our future and our children's future. And
Oh, Thomas, thank you, Thomas. And Jill, thank you, Jill.
Jill and Jill Stein gave $100 and Thomas gave $100.
Gosh, yeah. You've just being here, but thank you for that, Jill, and thank you, Thomas, as well. And gosh, yeah, thank you all.
Thank you. And now I'm going to hand it over to first Dr. Jill Stein, our iconic candidate who's put it all on the line for peace and people and over corporate profit. And then to Matt Ho for closing remarks.
I'm just really so inspired by this outpouring of support for Matt. And I'm just really grateful that we can be a family, a community together in this really perilous moment, that we can make something really wonderful happen. And it feels like, like Martin Luther King said, you got a choice between chaos or community. And that chaos is kind of like, it's really up close and personal in our lives right now. And we can change history here by deciding that we're going to have a future, and we're going to demand it. And it's going to start with a democracy, and we're going to fight it one campaign at a time, one candidate at a time. I encourage other people to think about running, building the Green Party or build independent politics, but let's not keep building more of what's destroying us. Let's build a future for people, planet, and peace over profit. That future really is in our hands, and it's really been great to experience that here tonight with everybody. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Matt, and thank you so much for taking us forward.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Jill, for being here, for leading the way, and again, for being so available to me over these last few months. It's meant a lot to me. So thank you. And then Rose and everyone with the campaign, thank you. And then everyone who showed up tonight. And I know it's not, I said tonight, I saw something in the chat. I know we keep saying tonight because we're on the East Coast, but for friends, out West, including Nick Hill Nanda. Is that correct? I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Sorry if I'm not, but I know I saw your thing about it's only 3:30 in Hawaii. So aloha, enjoy the rest of the day and the evening, but no, this is very meaningful to me, again, because of the people in my life. And I know it's meaningful for everybody else because of your lives and people you have in your lives. All of us have our stories. I think what we are going to do, we get on the ballot and we're going to be able to concentrate on more things with the campaign, which means telling more people's stories, opening this up. So it really is a campaign run and powered by people. And that's how we demonstrate the urgency of the situation, because as we said before, this is existential for so many people. But in order to do that, in order to make, because we know it's going to happen, if we're not in the debates, like none of these questions are going to be brought up, and if we're not in the ballot, people are not going to have the chance to vote for their families, vote their conscience, vote to save their society and their planet. So the urgency of getting on a ballot, you all have just demonstrated that tonight. Thank you all so much. And please contact the campaign, become involved. We want you to be involved, in our campaign. And so thank you again, everyone who's donated. And for those who are still looking to donate, MatthewHoferSenate.org. Every dollar is appreciated and needed. So thank you all very much. And I just want to also say day early, I guess, but Ramadan Kareem to my friends who are celebrating around the world.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to end the webinar now, but thank you both so much for a really meaningful evening.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rose. Thanks, Jill.
And thank you, Jill.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.